What's going on, guys, and welcome to I keep losing track of what episode this is. Welcome to the Warcry Podcast. I'm your host, Jehola Tiger. I'm just coming to you guys, a little late. It's been a busy week. This past week, I've had to work a monstrous festival here in the Oklahoma City area at my job, and so, man, it's been brutal. I, basically worked like 30-something hours in 2 days, and so I was resting up, so bringing this podcast to you a little late. I was supposed to come out last week, but it didn't. But anyways, some things that I kind of have noticed, really movies that I've kind of noticed and have been watching and, kind of really just thinking about a little bit that kind of make you think. And one of those movies is called The Resident. And this stars Jeffrey Dean Morgan and Hilary Swank. And, that's one thing that, about this movie, basically, she moves in, and this guy who's the landowner or the property manager, whatever, he owns the place, is basically gives her a place to stay because she's kind of, in between, her boyfriend, and she's moving out. And so, but, that got me thinking, what if, things like that, I feel like they really happen. And, something as meaningless as, helping someone with groceries, or your neighbor, helping them with groceries, or letting them borrow your lawnmower, can turn into, some type of obsession. But I feel like that happens. I feel like that happens more times than not. But that got me kind of thinking, kind of about, your surroundings and the people you're around, and I don't know, I just find it kind of interesting. But yeah, go check that movie out. It's kind of weird, kind of creepy. There's some aspects of that movie that just makes me feel kind of weird, because he's watching her from the crevices in the wall. It's just, yeah, it's kind of crazy. Another movie. This one's kind of an independent movie that I had just recently watched here in the last few days. But it's The Killing of a Sacred Deer. It's got Colin Farrell, Nicole Kidman. I was about to say Tom Cruise's ex-wife, Nicole Kidman, and then a few other people that, that if you notice them, you've seen them in other movies, and I can't think of their names. So this starts out as a doctor. Had a little bit of a drinking problem, and he basically he unsuccessfully performs a surgery on this man. Well, he befriends the son and the wife of the man that he quote unquote killed. And this kid who, he basically starts to stalk this man, Colin Farrell, the doctor, the kid. And a lot of weird stuff happened in this movie, and then it comes, at the ending, it's kind of got a crazy, kind of a very kind of dark but crazy ending. But I often wonder, I guess this is maybe a dumb question, but this is maybe a question you guys have had, is if something like that happens, the doctors get prosecuted for, maybe snipping an artery and letting somebody bleed out, or have an unsuccessful, surgery and they kill somebody. I always wondered if they're protected, but maybe that's something I need to look up, and I'll get back to you guys. But yeah, so that movie is pretty crazy because it involves some kind of psychological mystery and kind of a mysterious illness that befalls on the family. I really enjoyed it. It's from I think production company was A24, which, if you guys have watched A24 films, man, there's some crazy ones out there. But that's another movie. Next movie I want to talk about is Meet Joe Black. Now, I know this is kind of an older movie, mid-90s, late 90s, but it stars Brad Pitt, Anthony Hopkins, and man, I can't remember that girl's name. Claire something plays she's one of those 90s beauties, that, really not model beauty, but just beauty girls that you've seen in those 90s films. But That's one thing about Meet Joe Black. I really had to sit down and think about that. Because what if you heard something that happened? Like, for instance, how the movie starts is Anthony Hopkins is kind of like fallen, kind of ill, but he kind of doesn't feel right. But he keeps hearing this whispering, and the guy keeps, in the whispering, keeps saying his name. Well, then eventually he ends up following the voice, and he allows death to come into his home. And, excuse me, and death is Brad Pitt. And so he makes a deal with Brad Pitt to give him more life. And I know that's been a topic of, decades and decades and decades, making a deal with the devil or making a deal with death. I've heard both of those things. And one thing about that movie that really made me think is like, what if we've met death? Like, what if I was pumping gas one day at a convenience store and, I nudged someone, or maybe accidentally ran into somebody and, they look like a normal person, but they're death, or like they're not something that's, what it appears to be. And it's, something that's final. Or like another thing would be like if I was at the grocery store and there's, this is something too that I always observe in grocery stores is someone's at the grocery store and they have nothing in their hands. I get kind of weirded out. I think that's kind of a theory of mine, but like when they are shopping and they don't have anything in their hands, or they're not actively looking, they're just kind of looking up and down, and they have literally nothing, no basket, nothing to hold these things. That's to me is like, I kind of go the other way. I'm gonna be honest with you. I do that. That's like a weird thing that I do at grocery stores. Because I'm like, what if that's meant for me to like, hey, excuse me, sir, kind of trying to get by them. And that then links us, or does something to us. But Meet Joe Black, like I said, it's a super good movie. I really enjoyed it. I know, you look at the Rotten Tomatoes, and I'm not a fan of the Rotten Tomatoes score. If a movie sucks, it sucks. Now we can come to grips on that. But the ending is super satisfying. I really enjoyed it because everything kind of comes full circle, and it kind of makes sense at the end, But the beginning is brutal, and what happens to Brad Pitt's character. But go check that out. Meet Joe Black. And the final movie I'm going to talk about today is The Bone Collector, starring Denzel Washington and Angelina Jolie. We were all over the place right now with these movies. But to me, one thing I love about a good crime movie is when you have to put pieces together and the clues together. And I know, that casting of Angelina Jolie and Denzel's kind of a weird one. And they, at the end, they kind of have like some love connection. Or they, have one, or they begin, if you've seen the movie. I'm not going to ruin anything else, but it's always, with these crime movies, it's always, especially in the 90s, it's always somebody who is close to the protagonist. But it doesn't make sense at the beginning. Like, that person couldn't be it, or this person. One thing about Bone Collector that I really enjoyed is the fact that Lincoln Rhyme is paralyzed. He was shot, or he had some type of accident with a fugitive, and he ended up paralyzed. So now he's basically still a cop, but he's just like bedridden. And, these murders start to begin to happen, and Angelina Jolie's character, who's just a regular patrolman, had noticed some things and followed the clue and went down into the subway tracks and took pictures and evidence, and Lincoln Rhyme basically takes her under his wing, and then the movie really starts. But one thing about The Bone Collector that I really absolutely enjoy is the puzzle and connecting it back to an actual old school book. And I can't remember the name of that old school book, but like I said, if you haven't seen that, like I said, these movies are older movies, so if you haven't seen them, go check them out. If you've already seen them, let me know what you think of them, or like, you hold you kind of cheeks on your movies right now, but let me know. So today I was kind of thinking, I had, kind of been trying to keep the topics kind of in a wide range. Like, I don't want to talk about the same thing over and over. Like, that to me is very boring. I got a lot of responses for the last episode with the mysterious disappearances in Oklahoma with those 4 people that went missing in North Tulsa. Appreciate that. Man, I had really, kind of been thinking about that one for a while, and it's always hard to kind of try to put it in a linear timeline, because one thing about news articles, you start doing research and you try to filter it a certain way, you have to basically, piece by piece, note by note, try to figure out, how to make it into a linear thing where it makes sense to you guys. But today, I was listening to a podcast on Tinfoil Hat, and it had Tony Merkel. And Tony Merkel has a podcast called The Confessional. Shout out to him. And he had a guy basically email him and tell him this crazy story about this cult down in Joshua Tree. And kind of the crazy things that happened with this guy, like floating people, people in basically like wizard hats and vampires, all types of crazy stuff happened to this guy. Well, it got me thinking about what's locally here, and kind of some of my experiences and people that I know their experiences with cults or things of that nature. So in every small town, you always have, there's a cult activity. There's, all this crazy stuff going on out in the boonies. And so the beginning of this story starts, we have a Native American class, heritage class when I was in high school. And every Halloween they always brought me in, and I think I started telling stories when I was 14 in front of groups of people, and this really started my storytelling, kind of how, I tell stories, but that's how I got my start in telling stories in front of the public. And so they brought me in one year, and it might have been 2009, 2010. I was a freshman, sophomore, can't really remember. And I was telling these stories about Merle Home Park and different places in Oklahoma, and people started telling me stories about Fort Gibson, in Muskogee, in Tahlequah, and just different stories that people say, it sounds familiar. Well, my teacher at the time, she was really invested in this class and the spookiness of my stories. And she goes, I've been here a long time, but there's something that I haven't really heard anybody really talk about, but I'm going to tell you about this. There is a cult here in this town. And I looked at her and I'm like, sure, like, for real, like, you think of cults, you think of like Charles Manson, you think out west, or you think of out in the middle of the desert, or you think of, in a subway system or in underground tunnels, but you don't think about, here in a small town. And she goes, yeah, there is one here. I know. I've had, some students and people tell me about this, and they don't know how to go about it. And, me being, 14, 15 years old, it kind of, sparked my interest. Well, the class gets over, and I kind of forget about this for about a year. And then, every Halloween we have, or every week of Halloween, we tell every day there's a story time, or we have I was brought in to tell stories during this week of Halloween, or leading up to Halloween. And it was brought to my attention. I was just able to drive. I got my license, and I was a junior at this time, gonna be basically the end of my junior year. it was starting my senior year, because I got my license in that end of my junior year. But at the end of the beginning of my senior year, I started hearing, different stories, and, people always, want to tell me stories. So beginning of my senior year, when we're getting closer to Halloween, I was able to start driving. And yeah, I'm one of those I was young in my class. I was young like that. That's why people say I got baby face. No, I was playing. But Halloween's rolling, it's getting closer, and my teacher, asked me if I've heard any more things about what she told me, a couple years prior. And yeah, I hadn't really thought about it, and I started really kind of thinking, I got my license now. I'm gonna, let's see what we can do. Well, I have this '98 Chevy, red Chevy at the time that, can get around a little bit. And so I started kind of investigating. I started really looking into this, and we go down there, middle of the day, and if you guys have seen my YouTube page, there's a video. It's like my first ever video, and I think it's around the same time, time frame, but there's a lot of dead animal bones out there. Well, so we went out there and we found a bunch of dead animal bones, and we found one animal. It was a dog. I don't know what, but it was decaying, and it was looking like it was, how I say, like it was not quite, like it was already decayed, like the bones, and like it was basically bones, but it still had a little skin on it, a little flesh on it. And, I took a bunch of these pictures, and I started looking around. We get deeper and deeper into this set of woods, where people said this alleged stuff was happening. And there was, hundreds of bones. I would say dang near close to 1,000 bones. There was a lot out there. So I thought it was very interesting. I was like, okay, this place is kind of creepy. So we started staying out there. Be about 4 or 5 of us, but we would, every weekend it would be right after the football game. We'd stay out there, like we'd be out there all night, and we'd hear things out. Like it sounded like something was walking around us sometimes. One night we were out there. Dang, it's crazy, but we burned this thinking someone had abandoned a couch out there, and we lit that sucker on fire, and out in the middle of this big old dirt patch, like. So where this thing, okay, I guess I'll describe so there's a road that goes out by a power plant, and there's all these houses that are kind of focused around, not all, but like a few houses that are, leading down. Then you take a right, you get into like where all the Hispanic people lived in town. And then you keep going down, you get back to the river bottoms, where the river tributaries start to connect, and they make little inlets. And we were staying on one of those the closest inlet to where all the Hispanic people lived. And so we burned this couch, and it was crazy, but like we heard something thrashing through the woods, like it was running through these small trees. That's kind of undergrowth, and it was running. It was like you could hear it. It was like every time it hit, and it was like making a thudding sound with that kind of whipping noise. So I was like, dang, is that Bigfoot? Thinking. So we load up and we get out of there. We left everything. Like we left coolers, and we come back the next day, and something had tore up that little inlet area. Like tore it all up. Luckily, the stuff that we left was basically just tipped over. Like it wasn't anything crazy done to it. And so we kept going out there because we were like, we want to see what's out here. And my buddy had this 4-wheel drive Jeep, and it had rained really bad, so my truck couldn't get out there. So I had to park it at the end of the road. And we drove back there, and we basically, not like, I wouldn't say we were out there discovering anything, but like there's so many of these little inlet roads, like where the water, when it floods from these little from these little kind of not tributaries, because they're not. It's not like another river, but it's like where it floods this road and makes it more drivable, but it's all kind of flushed out. but it was making these roads where you could see where people have been, but you don't know how long. But it had little things where like little roads where it lead off into a different direction. And so I started telling people in my class, I'm like, hey, y'all heard anything about this? Have you heard? I got everything from, my dad's in the Freemasons, and they meet out there to, now that person that told me that, I kind of believe him low key, because you'll get at the end of the story, but I got from that to that's just a bunch of hogwash, ain't nothing going on out there, to basically, it's just teenagers out there partying, drinking around, y'all just out there drinking around, acting crazy. But one thing that really kind of made me, nervous, but also kind of made me really start thinking was there was a Hispanic kid that lived that I knew really well, who always kind of, told me things, but he was really, we weren't really friends, but there was respect there, and, I liked the guy, and he liked me back, so he told me, he goes, yeah, there's things out there, man. He had lived out there basically his entire life. Out kind of where there's a bunch of trailers back there, and he told me, he said, man, there's some dogs that go missing all the time out there. He said, if you notice, he's like, I want you to notice and pay attention to animals. So when you guys are driving back down here every week, I want you to take note of the animals that are, outside, or if they got a dog on a chain, all this stuff. So I started noticing. I started paying attention to that. Like I said, we went out there for 20 weeks straight. Over the weekend. Sometimes we go out there in the middle of the week, but we were out there all the time. And I started noticing that, the different animals, different dogs. Like there was one house that had kind of a fence in the backyard, and you could see the dogs, so the dogs would always bark or they'd chase, and they weren't there anymore. And then there was another dog who I ended up finding later on, and it's that picture that I took. That's that dog. That early on that I noticed the dog in the chain, on that chain. But then, as we progress, more we go out there, the dog is gone. And I thought it was really interesting. I was like, I don't know if that's the exact dog, but I assumed that it was, because it had looked the same. Same kind of build, same kind of light tannish color. But he told me that, and so I started paying attention. And I noticed there was no dogs or no animals on this road. And so as you get to the Hispanic part, there's this old abandoned house that sits kind of off in the trees. If you don't pay attention, you ain't gonna see it. So we go looking around in there, and we see sigils and things like that. And so I'm like, okay, we're something's going on. Like there's something here. One night, so as we keep going, one night we're out there and we see and you could see a faint fire at the very end of this road, and we're driving down in this Jeep, 4-wheel drive Jeep, and I'm looking, and it's a fire. We drive so fast down there, we're hitting every bump, man. People getting tossed around. We got people in the back hanging on for dear life, and his Jeep is really, really loud, and whoever that was out there ended up getting spooked by us coming, because we come flying down that road. And the fire was out, and there was no one to be found. And we searched that place. We got out. We had flashlights. Man, we had I went and bought one of those, really nice flashlights that can see, basically, with, you can tell what's what. And so we searched, and we didn't find anybody out there. So then I started talking to more people, and I started trying to get more information about kind of what's been going on. And I talked to that teacher again, and I talked to that Hispanic guy, and the Hispanic dude said, it's somebody on this road that lives out here. And I'm kind of like, that kind of piqued an interest, because I didn't think anything about it. And he goes, it's somebody that lives on that road before you get to here. And he said, the house looks very inconspicuous. You're never going to notice it, but it's someone there. Because we see people go down there. We know when people go down there. And we know every time you guys go down there. Because we can hear y'all laughing, doing whatever. He said, when y'all are down there, that's usually when nothing's going on. And we know that, there's, nothing weird happening. And so we started kind of, not just because we used to just fly down that road and get down there as quick as possible. Like we weren't paying attention to any of the houses besides, if they had dogs or not, or, animals. But there was a house, as soon as you come off the highway, you cross I think it's the first four-way, and you get kind of on down the road. And there's this house with it's just a lane that goes down. But there's a road that cuts in that goes towards another aspect of the road. And I noticed it. I didn't really notice it first off, but like as we, I kept noticing, like, there's something off about that house. And there was about four or five of us, and we were all loaded down in my truck. And I go, one night, it's real late, and there was literally no lights on at all in this house, ever. Like, we would never see a porch light on, nothing. We never saw any trucks coming in or out. I mean, we were out there a lot. So we started staking this house out, and we realized that, like, there was, like, nobody there. Or they're leaving when we were like, they were, like, coming out when we were coming out. It was just very strange. And so we pulled on the side road off that main little drag that took us back to the bottoms, or the river bottoms. And we pulled on down kind of where my truck couldn't be seen. We made it seem like we were just kind of, there's houses down here. We're just visiting family, whatever. So we pulled on down, and we all jumped out. We snuck up to the fence. And I'll describe this. The house is a normal-looking house, brick house, red brick house. And, gray roof, an attached garage next to it. But the weird thing about this house, is they had like a 15, maybe 10, in between 10 and 15 foot tall fence. Wooden fence. So it's custom built to try to get a fence that high. Now, chain link, you can do that, I think. But that high, I mean, the way that was built. So we snuck up to that fence on the back side. And off the highway, you can kind of see, but it's really kind of hard because the highway's built up and this is kind of lower ground. So you can kind of see it, but not really. And it's going to be hard to describe what we seen. But so we had basically stacked each other up. And at the time, I didn't weigh very much, so I could get up there. And what was told to me that I was not able to see because I had to basically lift this. There was a girl that I had to lift up. Basically, what was seen is there was sigils all inside the fence. Weird sigils, like undescribable sigils, like you can't make it out. And there was a fire going inside the barn that was on the back side. And you could see people moving past the fire. Like you could see the light change when someone passes by on the doorway of this big barn that was back there. And they said basically there was like weird sigils all over, like on the barn. It had some weird looking stuff. And one thing about that, it kind of gave me, and this is why we quit. I quit doing it, quit going out there. And I don't know if they went out there after me, but I was kind of the leader of it. So I was the one like, hey, we're going to go out here, we'll do this. One thing that kind of spooked me out is that she said it felt like we shouldn't be doing this. Like we should not be out here. And, I ended up eventually getting a quick look at it, and it's hard to describe what those sigils were. They were like circular, but they had like lines in them and very strange. It was almost like a maze, but it was like someone drew a maze and then put lines in it like, oh, these are roadblocks, type of thing. I know it was strange. But I never saw the fire like what she said she saw or that person said they saw. So, but people always talk about cults and them being like Charles Manson. And there's people out there that practice different things, and I in no way am going to disrespect those people because I don't want them after me. Obviously, you don't want any of that stuff after you. But one thing that, over my my period of time of moving around and getting to know people, and I hear these stories. I used to work for the county, Tulsa County, last year. And I was asking the person who does kind of, they did the nature tours and things like that. And they always had issues with people out there doing things like seances and, dancing around fires and stuff like that. And one day we did like a tour because there was a new trail being built. And I know we had some type of training thing, going out there, and we come into this it's basically called the overhang, but basically the top is like the part where everybody goes to, but underneath it is where all this stuff happens. And there was this painting of like this monster, like huge black painting of this monster, and you could tell where people had been burning the fire. It looked like the fire wasn't, like the monster was coming out of the fire. And this is out in West Tulsa. And a lot of strange stuff, and like when I walked over there, I looked at it, I said, it feels dark, like it feels heavy, like the atmosphere changes, like it's a weird like barrier, like when you get to a certain point, it kind of felt like heavy, like it was like something was here, like something was around, or it was, And she was like, well, and she sat down and was like, well, told me a story. She goes, one night I was out here really late because we were trying to get some stuff done with this trail. And basically she heard some people out there, and they had the fire going. She ended up having to call the police, and the people got basically took away. But she's like, we really didn't know what they were doing. But, I had talked to some other maintenance people who were out there, and they talked about, seeing people around there, and they called them Satanists, but I'm not sure what they were out there doing. But they were out there in the cliffs, in those trails, wilding out, doing some crazy stuff. But, I had heard a story, a guy had told me a story out of Midtown Tulsa, and I had told this on another podcast, Spirit Talkers podcast, one of the first episodes I was on. But one thing too that it's kind of crazy, about talking about this stuff is like it could be anyone. You don't know people's religions. You don't know what they believe in. You don't know where they come from. And one thing about this story that gives me goosebumps, and I know it's real because there's a certain feeling I get when he told me this story. So this guy I used to work with, he told me this story about when he was a young boy. And he would always go to his friend's house, and they'd always hang out, and they'd always run around in the parks, and this is in Midtown Tulsa. Well, his buddy was always like, hey, let's go down this one, but I was always told never to go down this tunnel. Well, they'd run the tunnels and, go end up on this side of, different parts of town. Like these tunnels will take you anywhere, just about. And one day, he decides to go down this other tunnel that they were not supposed to go down. And they get all the way down there, and this tunnel connects to multiple, like a psychiatric or a young woman's home. I don't know exactly what the name of it was. He didn't know, but he knew that he had heard stories growing up about, kind of babies disappearing, things like that, out of this young mother's home for women that that are young and how they have children. And there was a hospital, that's connected to there as well. I need to look it up exactly, what hospital, but he told me the name of the park, and I'm not going to tell that part, but you could probably find it out on your own if you look hard enough. So they go down this tunnel that they weren't supposed to go down, and he goes all the way down. And his friend's like, we need to go back. Something's weird. I don't feel right. There's something going on here. And they go far enough, and they see this altar. And there's all these kind of sigils and markings, and I'm getting goosebumps telling the story. And they look on this altar, and it's a baby. And his buddy was like, "I'm out of here, dude. I'm gone," and takes off. Well, he kind of starts to head that way, but he can see something moving in the dark that's darker than the dark. And I asked someone who's seen these things, kind of a religious, spiritual person that I know, and he equated to it as it's something evil. If it's darker, he has seen entities that are darker than dark. It's evil. And he goes to turn around to kind of run away, and this thing is this darker than dark entity, tall, like 9.5, 11 foot tall. He could see its eyes, but he can't describe. He was having a hard time describing the eyes to me at first, but I think they ended up being like yellow. This thing went through him. He felt it enter his body and leave his body. He's like 10 years old, 11 years old. And he takes off running. He goes, and well, he said it changed his life forever. But he knows that there's a group that meets down there, and he is really big. It ended up changing his life forever, and he's into certain things, and I'm not going to describe what they are, but he's into some things that he knows these things. And, kind of a crazy thing that he told me at the end of the story is that the friend that he was hanging out with, his dad was a double agent, double preacher. He worshipped Satan in the evening and the night, and was a pastor at a pretty big church in Tulsa. So I thought that was kind of crazy. I told that story on Spirit Talkers, but I want to tell it here because obviously this is the topic. But that's one thing that, like I said, when I heard that episode of the confessionals about this Joseph's Tree, I think, I was like, man, that's a great topic, and I know some things, but I have heard these stories, and I had some run-ins with some of these things, and that's what's crazy. Like I said, you just never know. You truly never know. I mean, I have there's another story that I could tell, but I may save that for, down the line, because it was kind of it's a weird story. And, yeah, let me know what you guys think of the episode. I always got a poll going up. Man, that last story kind of shook me a little bit. I'm kind of getting back on track. Yeah, because people will say that's an unbelievable story, but those things are out there, and I believe in them. Like, I believe they're out there. I'm not saying I believe in them, but I believe they're out there. And if you don't know, how to. I always have people ask me, how do you go through this? It's like, well, first of all, I believe in the Creator. The Creator up top. I don't believe in the religious Creator. I believe in the real actual Creator upstairs. I try to move in a way that's right, and I try to live my life right. I try to be a man of my word. I try to stand up for people that need standing up for, and I believe that's kind of what keeps that away from me. I think in a little bit. Now, I do have some other things that I do, but I have had people ask me, how do you? It's all about your faith, and if you actually believe in your faith and stand with your spirituality, you will be protected, because that's one thing that the Creator does, is he provides, and that means protection too as well. But if you guys want to follow me on TikTok, One Man Band 918, Twitter is the same, One Man Band 918. Facebook, Yahola Tiger. Before you add me on Facebook, please send me a message. Let me know you like the podcast, what episode you like. I will always reply back. That's kind of my thing. As I always get back to you guys. If you have a story to tell, YaholaTiger@gmail.com. Send me audio. I got some people sending me audio, so we'll have some audio stories for the next This Is Creepy Part 3. I appreciate everyone that listens, and I'll catch you on the next one.